If explicit stimulation feels like it helps you sleep, there's a reason. It lowers arousal quickly. Your body relaxes, your mind quiets, and because you fall asleep faster, it feels restorative. But that isn't the same as real sleep. It doesn't restore your brain. It changes how the entire night unfolds. Specifically, it disrupts REM sleep and it mistimes dopamine. And without you knowing, that shift quietly alters sexual arousal long before you notice anything's wrong. This video is brought to you by my HarperCollins published book, Mind Over Explicit Matter. If you're ready to quit porn and reclaim your life mentally and physically, go over to drtrishleigh.com/book. I'm Dr. Trish Leigh, cognitive neuroscientist. By the end of this video, you'll understand exactly why this happens and, of course, how to reverse it. Today, we're talking about the crash is real, the sleep is not. It's being hijacked. This is the hijack. The brain doesn't break here. It learns something, and that lesson has significant consequences. We'll get into vanishing arousal, but first, the red line is dopamine. Dopamine isn't relaxation. It's a drive signal. Explicit stimulation spikes dopamine, and then the brain responds protectively. The yellow line is prolactin. Its job is to suppress dopamine and shut the system down. That's why people feel calm or sleepy afterward. But here's the mistake. That calm isn't sleep. It's sedation. Dopamine drops below baseline. The brain reads it. This is ready for sleep. But REM sleep needs proper dopamine timing. When sedation replaces that timing, REM gets disrupted, so you fall asleep faster, but your brain never finishes the night. That, my friend, is the hijack. The brain learns this. Stimulation leads to shutdown, and over time, sleep quality drops first, and arousal regulation follows. At first, it really does feel like rest. Your body relaxes, your mind quiets, you fall asleep faster. And when you wake up, it's subtle. You're not exhausted, you're not panicked, you just don't feel fully restored. A little tired, a little wired, a little foggy. At first, that's the only sign, and it can be difficult to read. And because it's mild, the brain ignores it. That's how the hijack works. It doesn't feel harmful. It actually feels helpful at first. But over time, that small change compounds. Sleep gets lighter. Mornings get flatter. The nervous system stays just a little bit on. And that's when the brain starts adapting to the wrong pattern. The hijack starts as relief and shows up as subtle loss. We've actually seen this state for decades, long before people had language for it. The quiet numbness in Fight Club, insomnia, dissociation, functioning without feeling alive, the burnout stagnation in office space, showing up every day, checked out, waiting to feel something again, and the emotional flatline of Black Mirror, a world of constant stimulation without restoration. These weren't just stories. They were early signals. This state, awake but disconnected, functional but flat, has been woven into the fabric of modern life. So much so that we stopped questioning it. We started calling it normal, the new norm. But here's the paradox. What helps you fall asleep is the same place arousal slowly disconnects. This is where the hijack becomes the miswire. Night after night, the brain tracks outcomes, not intentions. It notices one thing: stimulation becomes shutdown. stimulation is unconsciousness. From the brain's perspective, that looks successful. So it learns the rule, not how to sleep, but how to shut down. Over time, REM becomes shorter and less stable, but REM sleep is where emotional memory and sexual arousal are calibrated. So when REM is consistently incomplete, sleep becomes stimulus bound instead of flexible. It becomes situational instead of responsive. At first, the cost shows up as lighter sleep. Then emotional regulation weakens. Then motivation drops. And only later, sexual arousal starts going offline in real-life situations. That's why people are confused. The arousal problem didn't start in the bedroom. It started in the sleep cycle. Nothing is broken. Let's look at what neuroscience actually tells us about dopamine's role in sleep. A peer-reviewed article published in Frontiers in Neuroscience summarizes decades of research on dopamine's involvement in the sleep-wake cycle. This paper shows that dopamine is not just a reward chemical, it's an active regulator of how the brain moves between wakefulness, non-REM sleep, and REM sleep. This means dopamine levels are highest when we're awake, then they drop as we enter non-REM sleep, and they remain lowest during REM sleep, the part of the night responsible for emotional memory processing and arousal calibration. That's very important because it contradicts a common assumption that dopamine is simply a wake chemical that disappears at night. Instead, the brain uses dopamine as part of the signal that tells the nervous system when it's time to switch states. So, when dopamine signaling gets altered, whether through stress, overstimulation, or repeated spikes at the wrong times, it can interfere with the brain's ability to move smoothly into and through REM sleep. That's part of what we're talking about here when we say that explicit stimulation isn't neutral. It interacts with the very neurotransmitter systems that the brain relies on to regulate sleep architecture. When I look at my clients' brain maps, this pattern shows up again and again. Not structural damage, not pathology, but a very specific kind of functional mistiming. First, we see low delta activity. On the map, delta shows up here as blue. Delta is the rhythm of deep restoration. It's what allows the nervous system to fully downshift. Often in my clients' maps, delta is underactive, which tells us that the brain never fully settles, even if the person has been sleeping for hours. That's why they say, I slept, but I don't really feel restored. At the same time, we see high beta activity. Beta shows up on this map as red. Beta is fast, alert, problem-solving type of energy. It's incredibly useful during the day, but it shouldn't dominate during rest. In these maps, beta stays elevated. So the body is asleep-ish, but the brain is still working hard. That's where the wired but tired feeling comes from. And then there's alpha. Alpha sits in between. It's the bridge. In my clients, alpha is often unstable. Alpha is strongly influenced by dopamine timing. It helps the brain shift smoothly between engagement and rest. When dopamine has been mistimed for long enough, alpha loses coherence. It's called alpha intrusion. So instead of moving cleanly from beta to alpha to delta to REM, the brain oscillates between alertness and shutdown. This is what this brain map and many others show us. a nervous system that learned how to go offline quickly, but lost the ability to fully restore. Not a broken brain, a mistrained one. And this, my friend, is the part most people don't understand. Sexual arousal dysfunction isn't about desire disappearing. It's about arousal losing flexibility. At first, everything still works, just not reliably. Attraction feels muted. Spontaneous arousal fades. Real connection feels harder to access. Erectile dysfunction usually shows up later, not because something suddenly broke, but because arousal had already been drifting offline. That's why ED is often downstream. SAD, sexual arousal dysfunction, is the early signal. This isn't psychological, and it isn't a masculinity issue. And this is why sleep disruption almost always shows up first, long before sexual symptoms feel obvious. ED, it's the outcome. SAD, it's the process. The brain doesn't confuse shutdown with recovery by accident. It is trained that way. Sedation teaches the brain how to stop. It lowers arousal quickly. It quiets the system. It makes unconsciousness easy. And because it works fast, the brain repeats it. But arousal doesn't come from shutdown. Arousal depends on timing. It's built during specific phases of sleep, when the brain moves through the night in the right sequence. That's why this matters. Sedation can turn things off, but it can't bring things back online. Only timing can do that. And when the brain practices shutdown night after night, but misses the timing that restores responsiveness, arousal doesn't disappear suddenly. It drifts. It becomes inconsistent, situational, effortful, until one day, people realize they can shut down easily, but they don't switch back on in the same way. That's the Miswire. Sedation trained shutdown. Timing trains arousal. But here's the good news. If the brain learned this pattern, it can relearn a new, better one. Rewiring doesn't mean forcing yourself to shut down harder. It means restoring the sequence the brain needs to recover. Because real recovery isn't about falling asleep. It's about finishing the night. When sleep unfolds in the right order, the brain recalibrates itself. Emotion, motivation, and arousal all reset as part of that process. So the goal of rewiring is simple. We stop training shutdown and we start restoring timing. That happens in layers. First, we reduce the signals that keep the nervous system mistimed at night, especially late stimulation that interferes with how the brain transitions into sleep, namely explicit matter. Second, we stabilize the rhythm of the night itself. Consistent sleep and wake times allow REM to reemerge and complete its cycle. Third, we regulate during the day, because a nervous system that stays activated all day long can't suddenly become regulated at night. When timing starts to return, clients notice the change early. They don't just fall asleep faster, they wake up feeling restored. Clarity improves, energy becomes steadier, and over time, arousal becomes flexible again, responsive, not forced, not dependent on high levels of stimulation. That's the rewire. Not discipline, not willpower. A nervous system that remembers how to move through the night the way it was designed to. Neuroregulation doesn't force the brain to shut down. It removes excess noise. It reduces overactivation, and it trains timing, so the nervous system can regulate itself again. That's why it works upstream of symptoms. We're not chasing sleep. We're also not chasing arousal. We are restoring the brain's timing. That's why I always say, regulate first. In this slide, one of my client slides, you can see beta and high beta reducing over time. These lines, as they trend down, indicate that the person's brain is more regulated, and at the same time, timing is coming back online. This type of data allows you to not only feel your progress, but to also see it. You can see with your own eyes every single day that sleep is improving and that arousal is coming back naturally. This is when we say goodbye to ED and goodbye to SAD. If your brain is used to stimulation to fall asleep, we don't take it away and leave a giant gap. We replace the function. I've always loved this one. Counting sheep wasn't just a silly idea. It was regulating. Slow counting, gentle breathing, or a familiar wind-down routine gives the brain something predictable to follow without spiking dopamine. That, my friend, is the key. No screens, no novelty, no effort to knock yourself out. Just a consistent signal that tells your nervous system this. It's safe to transition now. This isn't about perfect sleep. It's about retraining how the night begins. As regulation returns, sexual arousal dysfunction is usually the first thing to shift, not as a dramatic change, but as reliability. Arousal stops feeling random. It stops being dependent on the right stimulus, the right setting, or the right amount of effort. Instead, it becomes available again. That's how you know SAD is resolving. Erectile dysfunction, when it's present, tends to change later and a bit more quietly, because ED isn't usually the starting problem. It's the downstream effect of a nervous system that's been out of rhythm for a very long time. As sleep completes properly and the nervous system regains timing, the body doesn't have to be pushed or monitored. Function becomes automatic again, not perfect every time, not forced, just responsive. This part matters. If arousal feels inconsistent early on, that doesn't mean you're going backwards. It means the system is recalibrating. Timing returns before confidence. Consistency returns before intensity. And I have to tell you, pressure is the one thing that slows the process down. So the goal isn't to test yourself. It's to let regulation do its work. Because when the nervous system comes back into order, arousal doesn't need to be chased. It shows up. It shows up the way it was designed to. If this resonated, your brain map will show exactly where this pattern lives. This isn't guesswork. It's precision. So please go to drtrishleigh.com and check out the page on Regulate First, the brain mapping section. Then book your brain map with me. Let's rewire this together properly. But if you're not ready for a brain map yet, go over to the pinned blog post and check out the restoration versus sedation checklist that I've pinned there for you. This is what I want you to think about. Are you really sleeping? Well, let's find out together. And of course, control your brain or it will control you. I'll see you next time.